So I never intended on planting a church ever in my life. I'd never intended to be a pastor. And so the idea of planting a church and then being the lead pastor was a complete shock to me. But I had a name all decided. Not a name that I thought I would ever be a part of, but I thought this would be a great name for a church because Jesus described the relationship between us and himself in such a way that he gave us the name. And so every year, my attempt is for us to look at this and make sure that we're being true to who we were called to be, because I believe that planting this church, we were called to do it. I don't believe we were called to continue to exist. That's not the goal. But the goal is that whatever we do, it reflects this intention. And it's from John 15:5. Jesus said, I am the vine. He's referring to himself. I am the vine. And so you need to picture this idea of a vineyard. And then you see the vines which are coming from the ground and they come up, and then out of them are the branches. And he said, I'm the vine, you are the branches. And so that relationship, what does that look like? You really don't need Jesus to describe it. But as we slow down and look at it, it gives us understanding into the church and who we are to be. Do you know what the purpose of the church is? Do you know why you should go? Do you know why it exists? Primarily exists because Jesus founded it and said we needed it. But what does that look like? If he is the vine and we are the branches and we remain in him, we will bear much fruit, but apart from him, we can do nothing. And that is not something that is earth-shattering news to us. Most people know that. Children know that. They know that if you break a branch off of a tree, that branch is going to die. It does not have much more time left because it's separated from what gives life. And you know that if that branch is out there all by itself, there aren't going to be oranges that are spontaneously being produced or blooming, or grapes, or whatever kind of vine it came from. And so for us, it gives us direction, but it also gives us relief to not make this more than it needs to be. And what I mean by that is that the branch does not have the responsibility to produce. Nowhere does Jesus say that. He says that we are to abide, or to remain, or to be obedient. And as we do that, we're remaining in him, and then fruit will come from us. It comes from him and through us. Not only the fruit of a changed life, but the fruit of loving others, of putting the needs of others above our own. The desire to do that comes from him. The success of that comes from him. The idea of us being transformed, the old passing and the new coming, that's up to him. Our responsibility is just remaining in him. I mean, the branches have a pretty easy job, especially if they're connected to the one true vine, because that vine is not going to struggle. Because the analogy eventually breaks down when you realize that you've got to work hard to keep the vine alive. That's not the case here with our Creator. Jesus is just fine, and he will always be fine. And for that reason, all we have to do is remain in him, and our confidence and our hope and our trust, it's all taken care of. But as a church, as people, we love to somehow get into that role of being the vine and think it's our responsibility, or we think we've got to produce this. We have to make this happen. And we get out of our lane and we take on responsibilities that don't belong to us. And the more that we do that, we start to separate ourselves from the life that comes from him. we had a process that we had started months ago where we wanted someone to come in and take a look at us. We wanted someone to look at how we as a church are operating. And we made it really clear that who we are is defined by this passage. And so they sent somebody, and his responsibility was to come and to listen, to look for patterns, to see things that may be getting in the way, to see systems or processes that would get in the way of us accomplishing this mission. And so things such as communication came up, parking came up, and all of these other areas and systems that could get in the way of us being a community that remains in him. So for example, parking is the funniest one to me because it doesn't sound very spiritual. But if we are a family, branches all connected to each other, we're also inviting others to be grafted in. And if we're inviting them to be grafted in, they need to know that there's space for them. That they're not just loosely invited, but it was prepared for them. I joke with people sometimes, hey, I've got your chair still reserved for you. And in a way, when you have, a very full parking lot or every chair is taken, you're unconsciously communicating, unintentionally telling people, yeah, we're kind of full here. So every little thing we do could have an impact. We don't need to stress about it, but we need to be smart enough to get involved. We need to be smart enough to know that we're dumb and there's things that we don't see. But together, as we give input, as we look and share what we see, we get a 360-degree view, we can be better. But ultimately, we can't lose sight of the core of this, that he is the vine. And he's going to produce the fruit. We just want to do the best we can with the fruit that he produces. Someone on our team said it this way. They said, this feels like marriage therapy. In fact, the consultant that came said, nobody ever calls us without a problem. Usually there's a catastrophe or a crisis. The church is on the verge of splitting or breaking or has broke. And we're supposed to come in and try to help them fix it. And he said, we don't ever get calls from churches that don't have a crisis, that are healthy. And so it's like going to marriage therapy when you don't have a particular problem you're working on. Have you ever done that? Have you ever sought a consultant or a therapist or a coach when you didn't have a problem? Do you have an annual physical? Because the annual physical happens regardless of whether your body is doing well or not. But even then, when you enter into that process, you came in and said, I don't see anything wrong, but show us what we can't see. It's not a fun process. They can be as gentle as they want to be, but for certain personalities, such as myself, it always feels like a test. It always feels like a challenge. And unless someone scores me and our team at 100, then I'm frustrated. And that's why I need to be reminded of this passage. Not just for the church, but for myself as one of the branches. My responsibility is to stay connected to him. And by the nature of being a branch, I'm also connected to the other branches. This isn't just a Jesus and me life. It's not the way it was ever intended to be. That's why he says, I'm the vine and you, plural. He particularly uses that word. Y'all are the branches. And anyone that sees a branch realizes they don't just go off on their own with nothing coming off of them. There's a continual creation of new branches that come off of each other. So what I want to leave you with, what I hope you walk away with, is that you are required only to rest in Him, to abide in Him, to obey Him. And in that, you'll also stay connected to the branches. And then He will produce fruit. And we don't have time to get into what fruit is necessarily, but it's good. And it brings life. And it's meant, as Jesus made clear in His ministry, it's meant to bring life to others. Because our responsibility is simple. Love God and love people. Remain in Him, and He will remain in you, and you will produce much fruit. God bless.